What if I told you that a lot of what you think about psychedelic medicines are probably all wrong? And that the idea of seeing these trippy or scary or like really hallucinatory experiences are actually more based on folk wisdom, wives' tales, and urban myths. And that psychedelics are actually an incredibly potent tool to help us get into and be comfortable in our bodies. So, this week, I'm going to start talking about some of my shifting understanding regarding psychedelic medicines and why I've began to regard psychedelics as an incredibly powerful and helpful tool to help us get embodied and stay embodied. So let's get into it and kind of build this understanding from the ground up. So I first want to start by talking about sensations. And I'm meaning sensations in the most literal sense. So like the things that are happening inside of our body, both very subtle, very nuanced, at times very uncomfortable, and at other times very, very pleasant. So our body is giving us sensations all of the time. And if you've heard me talk before, you might have heard me say that symptoms are not necessarily the problem of your mental health. They were the solution, or symptoms are signals. Another way of saying that is that the sensations happening in your body, the sensation of anxiety, say, is a signal. It is telling you something. And the mistake that we make, in my opinion, in modern mental health treatment is we look at a sensation, and if a person labels that sensation as sufficiently unpleasant enough, then they're given a medication to numb that sensation. No regard or respect for like, what is this sensation actually trying to tell me? So the body is speaking to us through sensations all of the time, all of the time. And if you take this seriously and you start to pay attention to what I would call the language of your body, you'll begin to see that you are an incredibly sensational creature, and that the sensational experience of having a body is what I believe is the whole point of even being here and having this human experience. So when we're talking about the interplay of the mind and the body, we have to distinguish between the idea of our ego telling us a story and creating a narrative around what is happening versus the body, which is developing a narrative of the experience simply based on sensation, intuition, and feelings. So let's talk about like a felt sense experience. So if you're watching this video right now, I want you to think about something that you love. Something that you love very, very deeply. This could be a person, it could be a place, it could be an animal, and just spend just a moment thinking about loving that thing. And you might find that when you drop into that experience of love, there's a sensation tied to it in your body. And that sensation might be really, really subtle, but I promise you it's there if you develop the capacity to listen. On the counter to that, let's envision an idea or an experience that causes you anxiety. So envision something that really brings up and stirs up a lot of anxiety in your system. You might begin to feel tightening in your chest, a knot in your stomach, tightness in your jaw, all kinds of these somatic body-based symptoms. So those are all sensations tied to thoughts in our mind. So when we're talking about a felt sense experience, we're talking about the experience housed in the body. So one of the critiques of talk therapy is that when we sit there in a room and we process the same thing over and over and over and over again, and it exists only here in your frontal lobe and it never exists in the body, we're not tapping into the felt sense experience. Okay. There's very compelling literature, and I think therapy is moving this way in general, in it saying that you actually can't go through a therapeutic process, through a process of healing, if we can't tie insights, frontal lobe work with the felt sense experience of it happening inside the body. Okay, so felt sense is incredibly important. Now, this is where psychedelics come in, okay, because psychedelics used in the right way give you profound access to felt sense experiences. So I can give you an example from a ketamine session I had with a client, and this is a pretty dramatic example, but it's compelling nonetheless. So this is a person who struggled with suicidal ideation for, his whole life, like 15, 20 years. And we went into a ketamine journey, and he basically on the ketamine journey, he felt like he was having the experience of dying. And it was really scary, as you can imagine. He was fully convinced that he was dying. He had the felt sense experience that he was dying. Holy shit, I'm dying. And on the other side of that journey, he said to us, I used to think that I wanted to die, and death used to be the answer to all of my problems. Now I have felt the experience of dying. I've experienced the visceral fear that was housed in that process, and I no longer want to die. I don't regard suicide as an option to my problems anymore because the felt sense experience of going there was too much. And so fast forward a year later, and he still reports that, his life's not perfect. His psychedelics don't fix anything, but his tendency, his desire to go immediately to suicide or ending his whole life is no longer there. He no longer experiences suicidal ideation. So that's kind of more of an example of what the felt sense experience looks like. And that's an intense one. We can have felt sense experiences of a lot less dramatic things than like the flight of life and death. So it's important to begin to understand that when you take psychedelic medicines, these are medicines that are going to put you in contact with a lot of felt sense experiences. So you're going to begin to get a lot of activation in the body. And this is where I think there's a fundamental misunderstanding between like what psychedelics do. Like people, the characterization is that psychedelics put you in contact with like this weird, trippy world where everything looks like cartoons and you're hallucinating all this crazy stuff. And don't get me wrong, that is totally possible. It's very common for me to experience like sacred geometrical patterns, like shimmeringness. I've even seen like my whole body melt, which is particularly scary. So hallucinations are there, but that example that I just gave you is actually a really good example. Okay, so let's envision that you're in a psychedelic journey and you begin to see yourself melt. Okay, now the thing that quickly happens here is a person gets really, really scared. And they begin to go into mind and they begin to tell a story about what they're melting or why they're melting or whether they're melting or not. And they get caught up in like this very ego-based, driven desire to find and hold on to the reality of the situation. Now, an embodied experience guided with someone who knows what they're doing and with the intention to be embodied, we would say, okay, let's go into that experience of being melted. Let's watch your body be melted. And when I say watch, I'm not saying like, let's look at your hands and watch them melt. I'm saying like, let's go internal and let's feel what it's like for that body to melt. And what we find is that when you give the body the space to manifest in that way, to be in that sensation, we're not talking about literal melting. That's the ego, again, telling a story about literal melting. When we drop into a body-based experience of melting, it's amazing because we begin to have different memories. We begin to feel associated with something else. We begin to experience a totally different way of being in our body, and we have a felt sense experience. Essentially, another way of saying that is like the sensation of being melted, and what we're seeing visually, if your hands are melting in front of your eyes, is actually symbolic of a different type of experience housed in the body. So the ego, again, gets in the way. It loves to tell stories about sensations. And this happens outside of psychedelic medicines experiences as well. So if you're a person who experiences anxiety, I love the example of like you are, dating a new person and you're texting them. 2 hours have gone by and you start to get really anxious. Okay, so first you feel anxiety in the body, and then your ego steps in and begins to tell a story about the anxiety that you're feeling. So that person doesn't like me. He or she thinks I'm a loser. Of course they don't like me. I said that thing last night that was so stupid. That's why they're not texting me back. The ego is creating a whole narrative to make sense of the experience happening in the body. This is really important because we get to attune now. What's happening first, the sensation or the story? How are they interplaying with each other? And how do I experience sensations that I've labeled good, bad, negative, uncomfortable? And then how do I create a story to align with whatever it is that I have judged happening inside my body? And vice versa. What is happening inside my body that feels really good, spacious, expansive, that I then tell a wonderful story about how good I am, how much this person likes me, whatever. The point here to really drive home is mind and body are continually playing off each other. And one is telling a story, the mind, and the body is feeling. And when we are not comfortable with feeling, then the mind is going to create a story that matches with our discomfort. Psychedelics often put you in contact with sensations in the body that are incredibly intense, scary, and uncomfortable. If you watched my video last week about the basic perinatal matrix, I gave a lot of examples of like really intense experiences that happen in the psychedelic journey. And then what happens, what I see happen in a place where we haven't created a landscape to like be in the body, the mind just runs rampant. And we tell all these crazy stories about how that trip was so bad because you don't have any connection between the mind and body. You've now created this horrible narrative of the experience, and you missed the opportunity that your body was telling you and bringing up for you to experience, to become more acclimated to what it's like to be in a body. Being in a body is uncomfortable. It is. And I'm not going to sugarcoat that. It is also beautiful. Okay. It's both. And so this is where dissociation comes in. This is an important piece here because if you are not in a place where, well, let's just say if it's really hard for you to be embodied, let's say you're a person who is chronically dissociated, which is very common, especially if you're a victim of trauma, if you have a lot of developmental or attachment or relational trauma, dissociation becomes your solution to everything. Because when there's no relationship there that's safe for you to engage in, then the only place to go is in the clouds, just to get out of the body. It's the final resort when our capacity for coping has been totally overwhelmed. And so if you spent your whole life in a dissociated state, or that's where you spend the majority of your time, it's really difficult to get embodied. So then what happens if you go into a psychedelic journey where you are used to staying dissociated? Well, big surprise. Your old familiar coping mechanisms come in, which are beautiful. They got you this far. They were very protective, and they dissociate you out of the medicine experience. So we don't get any of the felt sense work. This is why a lot of people will say, I took a shitload of this medicine and I didn't feel anything. That's because they probably live in a chronically dissociated state, and the system, their nervous system, recognized psychedelic medicine as a threat because it's asking them to be in their body, and they dissociated out of it. This is really important. A lot of practitioners and providers don't necessarily know how to work with dissociation, or they're not doing enough preparation work to resolve dissociation or to create more embodiment in the client or in the person participating in the medicine. So they just keep repeating chronically dissociated experiences, and they're not attuned to the felt sense, sensational experience of the body. So there are modalities that work directly with dissociation. Modalities like somatic experiencing, NARM, the neuroaffective relational model, a modality that I've been getting trained in and I'm facilitating now called psychedelic somatic interactional psychotherapy, PSIP. You've heard me mention that before, and I'm going to continue mentioning that. These are all modalities that are specifically designed to work with dissociation. So let's also talk here about the idea of the window of tolerance, and how different modalities work within the window of tolerance. So essentially what we're saying when we talk about window of tolerance is we're trying to find, where is the threshold where your body gets activated enough that you now dissociate? Where can you no longer tolerate being in your body? So a modality like somatic experiencing is trying to attune very closely to your window of tolerance. And if we go above the window of tolerance, if you begin to get dysregulated, we regulate it back down. We get your nervous system calmed again. Now, this is beautiful. If you're living your life in a chronically dissociated state or a very hyperactive state, your nervous system is always in fight or flight, then understanding how to get back into your window of tolerance is very, very important, and likely work you will have to do to build the foundation to be able to move forward with more embodied work. And if you're working with me, what I would ask you to do before we ever started entertaining the notion of psychedelic medicines. A modality like PSIP is a modality that's designed to get you out of your window of tolerance, to just give the body an opportunity to express all of the charge that it has. A really simple way of understanding this would be like, in a sense, we're trying to go into the panic attack. We're trying to get out of the window of tolerance in a safe container where the body can express the charge and discharge all of that energy that is biologically very expensive for your nervous system to hold on to. So the reason I'm bringing this up is because we have to start thinking about the set and setting in psychedelic therapy sessions. Okay, and this is very much going to depend on the skill level of your facilitator and their knowledge on like how to work with dissociated and hyper vigilant or hyper escalated states. When we're talking about building the container to house the psychedelic medicine experience, we're talking about like how do we set up the set and setting to be able to hold whatever comes up? And are we trying to hold your experience within your window of tolerance? Or have we done a lot of the necessary preparation work to prepare your body to be embodied while we go outside of your window of tolerance? I would argue that if you're taking psychedelic medicine, you're making the commitment to go outside of your window of tolerance, and you have done the preparation work necessary to be able to hold that. This is why when we're talking about having a bad trip, my opinion now is a bad trip is when a person comes into contact with sensations in their body that they cannot tolerate. So then they go into a dissociated state, or then they get stuck in their mind to create a narrative of why what is happening sucks. Instead of saying, okay, all this is coming up in my body. I've been doing a lot of preparation work and I understand that this is going to come up. And now I trust my container. I trust the facilitator. I trust the set and setting. Let's see how long I can sit with the discomfort in my body, and let's see what I can learn from being embodied in this way. When we take psychedelic medicines, I'm going to reiterate this, we're kind of committing to say, I'm going out of the window of tolerance. When we're doing preparation work for PSIP, we're not using psychedelic medicine, but we tell the client when we put medicine on board, we're going to increase the speed and the intensity of the experience. We have way less exit points at that point. We're getting into the body and we're just going for it. So I think what I'm saying in this video is a little bit scattered. I'm throwing a lot of information out here, but if there's one piece that I could really hammer home, it's that if you're going to engage in psychedelic medicine, I encourage you to view that process as an opportunity for you to get embodied, and to get embodied in potentially a very, very, very uncomfortable way. I recently participated in a couple of ceremonies where the medicine essentially showed me. It was like I had 5 hours of an internal coach facilitated through the powerful entities and spirits associated with this medicine, who was showing me how my mind and my body interplay with each other. So I would have a thought come up in my mind, and the medicine would tell me, where is that? Is that mind or body? And I would say, mind. And she would say, beautiful. Now feel that in your body. And then the felt sense experience would come up boom, so powerfully. And it was really heavy. At times it was really, really heavy. But I trusted, because I've been doing embodiment work, I've been doing PSIP work, I trusted that I had the capacity to stay embodied while that was happening. And then later, the same thing would happen where I would feel a sensation. I would feel like someone move into my aura in the space, and a sensation would happen. And the medicine would say to me, is that body or is that mind? And I'd say, that's body. Beautiful. And then I would feel the sensation through my body. And then I would be able to make sense of the sensation through the mind, which is kind of our sense-making instrument, right? That's where the ego, the ability to project ourselves forward and backward, to tell time, the frontal lobe, that's where that comes in handy, because we get to then take all of this material and make meaning out of it. And we can make meaning out of it in a positive way, or we can make meaning out of it in the way of like, oh my God, I feel anxiety, or I feel depressed, or I feel sad, I'm a piece of shit, which is what lots of us do, which inherently is like crazy. Like, how are you going to take what you're feeling, the sensational experience of what you're feeling, and then use it to make a judgment about who or what you are? I should probably make another video about that, because that's a whole nother concept, but important nonetheless. So in closing, let me reiterate this one more time. Psychedelic medicines, I now believe, are here to help you be embodied. And if you're going into the process without an understanding of your window of tolerance, without a facilitator, therapist, guide who can help create a container and a space where you can be embodied, then you risk having these experiences that do not give you felt sense and that continue to exist as insight, which is not a place to make lasting and meaningful change in your life. Okay, I hope that's helpful. I'm going to keep talking about embodiment and psychedelic medicine, because honestly, it's just a mirror of what's happening in my life right now. And it's completely changing the way I understand how to engage and work with these medicines. And I think it's important that you also understand this if you're interested in exploring these modalities for healing and for improving and expanding your consciousness and your life. So thanks again, as always, for sharing with me your most valuable resource, which is your attention. Guard it. Don't waste it. It's easy to do. If you like this channel, please like and subscribe. Feel free to share. Come back next week. I'll have another video up in the realm of psychedelics, embodiment, spirituality, and mental health. Thank you.